Okay, so I want to start with a song that what we're going to be learning about today is Abraham. These are the Torah portions where he is found. And one second. Yeah. And so I want to sing a song with the words that have to do with Abraham. So I'm going to translate. I'll read the words and translate, and then I'll sing the song. It comes in the morning prayers. We say it every day. It says, Atahu Hashem Elokim, you are God, Asher Bacharta be'Avram, that you chose Avram, V'hotzeto mi'Ur Kasdim, and you took him out of the place called Ur Kasdim, V'samta Shemo Avraham, and you gave him the name Avraham. Notice you changed his name from Avram to Avraham. Umatzata levavo ne'aman lefanecha, and you found his heart faithful before you. So these are just very, very beautiful words of God taking Avraham out of the place called Ur Kasdim. Like later he would take us out of Egypt. And he changed his name and he found Avraham's heart faithful. It's just a beautiful idea. I'll sing the tune first and then I'll put it to words. I die, ding 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 ding. I die, ding ding ding. I die, ding ding ding. I ding 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 ding. Oh, ding 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 ding. Atahu Hashem Elokim Asher B'charta be'Avram V'hotzeto me'Ur Kasdim V'samta Shemo Avraham Umetzata et levavon ne'eman lefanecha V'matzata et levavon ne'eman lefanecha Atahu Hashem Elokim Asher B'charta be'Avram V'hotzeto me'Ur Kasdim V'samta Shemo Avraham Umetzata et levavo ne'eman lefanecha Umetzata et levavo ne'eman lefanecha. Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. So we began last week learning about Abraham and Sarah, and we're continuing. There's basically 4 portions where they are the centerpiece. And we're going to be learning a very, very kind of subtle and innovative perspective here. We're going to look at Abraham and trees, because we're going to see trees appear many times. Very few commentaries actually pick up on this, but we're going to go through in the short time that we have. I always kind of like apologize in the beginning that I only have a very limited amount of time. And the goal of this class is always growth through Torah. And only at the end will we see how we can use this idea that I'm going to try to give over in our own lives. So the first thing I'm going to mention is a mystical idea, which I can't go into in great depths, but according to Jewish tradition, especially the mystic tradition, we do have a tradition of reincarnation. And to really understand the story of Abraham and Sarah, we have to understand that according to probably the greatest Kabbalist of the last 2,000 years, the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, that Abraham and Sarah are reincarnations of Adam and Eve. And so to really understand the depths of what they tried to accomplish, that's what we have to understand. And we're going to see it even more next week, because the place where Abraham buries Sarah is in the place where Adam and Eve are buried. But it's more than that, just they're buried there. Later, Avram was also buried, and all the other patriarchs and matriarchs, except for Rachel. So that's the first thing we have to say. And we know that in the Garden of Eden, so why were they expelled? Because they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they were not able to eat from the tree of life. So every time that we read the Torah publicly, when we put it back in the ark, we quote a verse that says, Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba, that the Torah is a tree of life for those who grasp onto it. So having said that, now when we see all of a sudden trees coming up in the whole story of Abraham and Sarah, there's a whole different meaning of this, because the trees that are going to appear in what I'm giving over as they appear in the Torah are hints, allusions to the tree of life. So where is the first hint? It's in this week's portion. So God appears to Abraham right after he has circumcised himself. And God, as it were, came to visit the sick. And Abraham is having a unique vision of God. God appears to him, and the amazing thing is that the Torah does not record what this vision was. That would be a whole other class, what transpired there. But here in the middle of the vision, Abraham, who is famous for bringing guests, home hospitality, sees three strangers, and as it were, says to God, if you don't mind, I'm going to have to interrupt this vision because I have to take care of these guests. Now, at that point, he doesn't know that there are three angels who are coming. One of them is going to tell them that they're going to have a child after decades and decades of being not able to have children. So when he greets the strangers, he says, come and rest under the tree. And then it says, take a little water and wash yourself up. And then he goes and he and Sarah prepare an enormous feast for them. And then again, it says that as he's feeding them, Abraham is standing under the tree. So we understand that it's more than just, the Torah doesn't just mention little facts for no reason. So I'm going to mention something in the name of Rabbi Shlomo Karlbach, whose yurtzeit is tomorrow night, his 26th yurtzeit. So he says two things about this. So why does he say rest under the tree? Now, Abraham uses every opportunity to teach people about one God. That was Abraham and Sarah's mission in the world, to teach people of one God and that it's time to wean ourselves from idol worship. So Rabbi Karlbach says, when he says, come rest under the tree, he was inviting them to hold on to the tree of life, because that's what Abraham was teaching. He was teaching people we need to wean ourselves, as it were, from idol worship and connect to something much deeper. And this is what's called the tree of life. The Torah is a tree of life. Now, I'll mention, you'll say, well, the Torah hadn't been given yet. How could Abraham be referring to the Torah as a tree of life? But we'll see after the three angels leave. So God, and one of the angels is on his way to Sodom to destroy the evil city of Sodom. Abraham pleads for the people, even though they really are not very good people. But nonetheless, he pleads for God to save them. But right before, we have something extremely unique in the Torah. It records God's inner thoughts. And the Torah says, recording God's thoughts, can I hide from Abraham what I am about to do when he will teach his children to follow in the way of God and to do the mitzvot? So you say, wait a minute, the mitzvot haven't been given yet. So this is one of the hints that our sages teach us, that all the patriarchs and the matriarchs were already, in a sense, observing the commandments even before they were given. So you'll ask, well, how could that be? Is they intuited the spiritual principles behind the mitzvot, and they were observing the, let's call it the spirit of the law. Some even understand that they were observing the actual laws themselves even before they were given. Why? Because all the patriarchs and the matriarchs were prophets and prophetesses. And they could see already in the future what would be given to the Jewish people. And so Rabbi Karlbach, along with saying that really he was inviting them to come under the tree of life. So he also says, so why did he offer them just a little water? Here he goes and he prepares this incredible feast for them, but it says, take a little water. So Reb Shlomo says a beautiful thing. He says, what he was trying to tell them is, if you're holding on to the tree of life, which is called the Torah, you only need a little bit of it and it will carry you forever. Why? Is because later the sages teach us, ein mayim el Torah. Anytime water is mentioned in the Torah, it's a hint to Torah itself. That's why we have this, just like we have the idea of a tree of life, we have this idea of mayim chaim, living waters. That's the whole idea of purifying in a mikvah, of ritual purity in water. The water purifies. So you only need a little to turn you on, like that. And once you, in a sense, you've been turned on, then you could go forever. You can go forever. So the sages say one more thing about this tree, an amazing thing. And they say, on the merit of Abraham greeting the guests and bringing them under the tree so that they could rest and eat, all of Israel merits the holiday of Sukkot. Why? Because the top of the sukkah has to be from branches or living vegetation, but it usually comes from a tree, branches of a tree. So this is an amazing idea, because Abraham invited them to come under the tree. All of Israel now merits the holiday of Sukkot. So this idea is one of the most important teaching of the sages, called Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the deeds of the patriarchs and the matriarchs are a sign for their children. Everything that they do, for those who have been coming to this class from the beginning, I've mentioned a number of times, I can't mention it enough, that all the stories in the Torah are archetypal, that everything that they did is recorded in the Torah because it's a sign for the children. It paves the way. It teaches us. This is growth through Torah. We want to grow through Torah, then we should study the Torah. As simple as it is, because these stories are not one-time stories that happened to people a long time ago. These stories reoccur in our lives, in every generation, in every person. That is the most important thing to understand about learning Torah. So here we have this idea that Abraham does what appears to be a simple act. He brings a couple of guests. He feeds them under the tree, and then all of Israel merits the holiday of Sukkot. So what we have to understand here, that it's even deeper here, because the sages say another thing about Sukkot, and they say that all of Israel, it's fitting for all of Israel to dwell in one sukkah. If we had, I'm going to mention it quickly, but the whole holiday of Sukkot is about unity. We take 4 species and we put them together and we hold them together. And we have this idea that all of Israel is fitting to be in one sukkah. And we're told that the 4 species that we take represent 4 different types of Jews, and from the very righteous to the not so righteous, but we put them all together. There has to be a unity. So where did this unity come from about Sukkot? And actually the prophetic reading that we read from Zechariah on the first day of Sukkot is all about that after the Mashiach comes, after the Messiah comes, all the nations of the world will come up to Israel to celebrate Sukkot. So it's not just about all of Israel is coming together. All of Israel merits to, or is fitting to live in one sukkah, but the idea that the whole world will come eventually and celebrate Sukkot. Many of you might know it didn't happen this year because of the pandemic, but every year approximately 10,000 Christians come to Israel on Sukkot to show solidarity with the Jewish people, specifically on the holiday of Sukkot, because of this prophetic reading. And they actually have this parade through the streets of Jerusalem. I've gone a couple of times. Absolutely amazing, with banners and flags and people in their native dress, and everyone's holding Israeli flags. It's an amazing thing. It's called the Parade of the Nations. So what I want to say, though, is this idea of unity in Sukkot is coming from Abraham, because it's Abraham who has the universal vision of that the whole world has to learn about the one God and ultimately observe and come in harmony together. It was Abraham who first initiated this messianic vision that the Jewish prophets later picked up on. Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Zechariah, all of them picked up on this messianic vision. But who was the initiator? It was Abraham. So when we say that all of Israel merits the holiday of Sukkot because he brought the strangers under the tree, he thought they were pagans. He didn't know that they were angels. And yet he reached out to them and he invited them to come under the tree of life. Okay, so now, very, very quickly, we'll see that one of the places that is mentioned a couple of times in this parsha is Alonei Mamre, that Abraham lived near Alonei Mamre. And Alon is a tree, is an oak tree. Sometimes they translate it as terebinths. But one of the places that Avram lived were these oak trees. And in Israel, sometimes you see these ancient oak trees. They look like they've been there for thousands of years. Actually, olive trees can last for thousands of years. There are olive trees in Israel that are 2,000 years old. And we've seen oak trees that they look like they've been there forever. But even more is in the end of this week's parsha, it says that Avram planted an eshel tree in Beersheba. So Rashi, the great commentary, brings two opinions from two sages, Rav and Shmuel. One says he planted an orchard in order to have fruits to feed to all of the guests that he was hosting. And the other one says that the word eshel, the three letters of eshel, in Hebrew it's an aleph, a shin, and a lamed. These are the first words for eating, achila, drinking, shtia, and sleeping, leina. So this word eshel, but the second opinion also says that he also planted an orchard, but he created an inn, like a little hotel, to put people up who were traveling through. So here's another mention of trees. In next week's portion, when he buys the land in order to bury Sarah, so it says that when he bought this land, it says Vayakam. The land rose up, and the cave in it, and all the trees around it rose up. So Rashi says, what does it mean they rose up? So Rashi says because Abraham bought it, this was the first purchase of the land of Israel in Hebron. And so Rashi says because he purchased it, it had what's called an aliyah. It rose up. Now that's the modern word for someone who comes to Israel. They come on aliyah, vayakam. The trees got up. Why? Because Abraham was such a holy person. Not just people who were in his presence, and I mentioned Sarah also, were raised up, but the land itself was raised up. Now, an amazing thing, a gematria, a numerical value, this word vayakam, that everything rose up, equals the word in Hebrew, Zion, Zion, Zionut, Zionism. So Abraham is the first Zionist. He comes on Aliyah to Israel, and he plants trees, and the trees that exist raise up. The whole land is raised up. Now, I want to mention one other tree, and then we're going to put this all together, is when Moses sends spies. When we're in the desert and we're about to come into Israel, he sends 12 spies to check out the land. And he gives them a whole list of instructions. What are the people like, and how big are the cities, and how is the land planted? And he says in it, Hayesh ba eitz im ayin. Is there a tree there or not? Now the word tree is in the singular, not plural. We would understand, are there trees there? We want a land that has trees, but it's in the singular. So Rashi, the commentator, says what he was really asking for. He said, is there a tzaddik? Is there a righteous person among the people who live there? Because of his righteousness, will protect them. So the connection here is, in the beginning we said the Torah is called an Eitz Chaim, a tree of life. And then we said that now we're saying that Moses is calling a tzaddik an eitz. And many commentaries say when he was asking, is there a tree or not? He was saying, is the tree of life there? Is this the earthly Garden of Eden? The truth is, he knew the answer. He knew that it is. The land of Israel is the earthly equivalent of the tree of the Garden of Eden. But the point I want to make is, he was saying, is there a righteous person there? So what we can understand, and this is how we're going to integrate it to our own life, who is really the tzaddik of Eretz Yisrael for the last 4,000 years? It's Abraham. Abraham is the tzaddik who is guarding the land of Israel on his righteousness, on Sarah's righteousness, on Isaac and Rebekah's righteousness, on Jacob and Rachel and Leah, our patriarchs and matriarchs. They are the tzaddikim, the righteous ones that are protecting the land. They are protecting the land. So as far as spiritual growth, what we can learn from this is, so how do we attach ourselves to the Torah? How do we attach ourselves to the tree of life? So we attach ourselves to the Torah, but we need teachers. Everyone needs a teacher. Everyone needs a holy person to attach themselves to. Not in an extreme way, not in a way that they become an intermediary. We don't really believe in intermediaries. Many other religions have intermediaries. We don't believe in that. But we do believe in attaching ourselves to holy people. That's a good thing. To this day, we attach ourselves every time we pray 3 times a day. The first thing we say is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. We're constantly, every time we pray for a sick person, we invoke the names of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. So the way of spiritual growth is, first of all, is to attach ourselves to the Torah. This is the first step of spiritual growth. But then we find the greatest of the tzaddikim, they also had teachers. Everyone had a teacher. Moses' teacher was God. But that's why we call Moses Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, our teacher. And Isaac had a teacher, Abraham. Abraham had a teacher also. He went to the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, the son and the grandson of Noah. Abraham also had a teacher. So I'm encouraging everyone to connect to the tree of life, connect to the Torah, connect to Abraham's universal vision for all mankind, that eventually, and we're going to next week, I'll give you a hint already. We have already, I prepared a beautiful understanding of this universal vision as we can see it. So that's my blessing to all of us, to all of Israel, to the whole world, that we connect to the Torah, we connect to the patriarchs and the matriarchs, but even more important, that each and every one of us attaches ourselves to a teacher, to a holy person, or many men and women. So I give all of us a blessing. And as we always do at this point, anyone who has a comment or would like to ask a question, so just one at a time, just unmute yourself and please.
Would you please elaborate on the Jewish understanding of reincarnation?
Oh, who's talking?
Deborah Lindsay.
Deborah Lindsay. I'm just looking through my, oh, there you are. Okay. This is not so simple. I actually wrote an entire book about it called Return Again. So it'd be very hard in a few minutes, but the important thing is that our mystic tradition for thousands of years has been teaching the idea of reincarnation. It was very hidden. It was very, very hidden, but today it is what we'll call normative understanding in Judaism, this concept of reincarnation. The one thing I will mention is it is not exactly, most people have the idea, and I'm not putting any value judgment on this, of the Eastern concept of reincarnation. The Jewish concept is far more complicated, far more complicated. You could Google, because we just simply don't have the time, you could Google the Jewish view of reincarnation, and I'm sure you'll come up with 20 or 30 websites, but I have to say, you have to be very careful about which websites you're on. Not all information out there is 100%, but it's a fascinating subject, absolutely fascinating. And I'll just say, if you're interested, you could go to my website and you could see the book. It's called Return Again, and everyone's invited to check it out. Anyone else?
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm sorry. We just don't. It's a huge subject. Huge subject.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you all for coming. I really, really, really appreciate it. And we'll be back next week, 4:30. And of course, all the other great classes that you have on Israel 365. Take advantage. Okay. Thank you all, everyone. I saw a bunch of messages from people. I can't respond to all of them, but thank you. I appreciate it very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Shavua Tov.